Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
You silence the doubters. You get the best tools. You work with the right people. You look to the future and bust through.
Hello and welcome back to another episode. On today's episode, I have two amazing guests joining us here on the Impact Farming Show. First time ever, we are having a father-daughter duo, so I am really excited. I'd like to welcome Annessa Good and Merle Good. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us, Tracy.
You know, this is really neat. I learned about both of you guys because you're so big in the industry. And I thought, what a perfect package. I'm calling you guys a package, even though I know you work separately. But you guys bring that well-rounded package. You're both in the helping farmers with transition, your family, and also you have a farming background. So you really cover this subject from all angles. So I'm really pumped. Are you guys?
Awesome. Very excited to be here.
Good.
Absolutely.
So that being said, let's dive a little bit more. Merle, you are a farm business management consultant with your own company, GRS Consulting. And Annessa, you are an agriculture transition advisor with Farm Credit Canada. That is awesome. So today, before we dive in, I'm going to get our guests to tell us a little bit more about themselves, and then we're going to roll into part one of our two-part series on succession, the overarching topic of transition planning, with episode 1 on succession and episode 2 on wealth management. Sound like a plan, guys?
Perfect.
Good. Okay, so before we get rolling, who wants to start and share a little bit more about themselves?
Go ahead, Dad.
Okay. Well, thanks once again, Tracy, for asking us to participate. It's a pleasure to do my first podcast, so this will be interesting.
Yay.
Says old dog,
You can teach an old dog.
Yeah, you can teach old dogs new tricks, so that's kind of cool. Just a little more of a background. I was a provincial tax specialist for the province of Alberta for 34 years, and also developed a two-generational farm with my father at Cremona. We were one of the first people in Alberta to import Simmental cattle back in the late 60s, early 70s. So it was quite a fun time back then in the purebred livestock business. We then, after Dad passed away, I felt that I couldn't keep doing everything, so we got rid of the cattle, and I went into an export hay business to shipping hay to Japan, and kept my off-farm job. And then when I retired from the ministry, I started GRS Consulting with Peggy, and Nessa joined our company for a couple of years, and then she went off to Farm Credit. So I've met a lot of farmers, do quite a bit of public speaking in the past, and look forward to this new medium to get our message out and invigorate farmers in succession and estate planning.
Thank you, Merle. We're going to have a good time. Annessa?
Yeah. Thank you again, Tracy, for giving us this opportunity. And it's always, I love getting to speak with Dad. And I think that is a little bit of the power, is trying to provide both generations' perspectives to the same topic. And, you know, we're very real. Even Dad and I preparing for this thing, right? We had our moments for sure. So we're very candid with that coming across, because we do live and breathe it for sure. And like Dad mentioned, I did come home and got to join the family business for a couple of years there and get an excellent mentorship. And then I know you had my colleague, Patty Durand, on recently for our service with Farm Credit Canada. So we are spread out across the country now. Patty did an excellent explanation of our services, but for anyone, whether you're an FCC customer or not, we do have advisors that can help you and your family start the conversation. So loving it. It's been great.
Good. Okay, guys. So why don't we set the stage for the conversation with what I alluded to earlier? Can we start with some definitions of transition, of succession, and wealth transfer? And just kind of set the stage for our audience, and then we'll lead right into our conversation.
Sure. Well, when I started in my career, succession was the word.
Yeah.
And then estate planning, I've always had this connotation of wills. And
Yes.
so about 20 years ago, I was thinking this has got to be a better way to explain this. And so what I come up with, and now with Transition, which Farm Credit kind of put together, I explain to people, I think it's really important to have 3 circles, really, and I wish I could show you, but on a piece of paper, just on one circle, type in the word succession, and then on another side of the page, make a circle called wealth, and then below that is a circle called non-farm assets. And so succession to me is the transference of a business. Now, most of us are prairie-based, land-based agriculture. So what I always say to people is, can you have a business without owning land? The answer usually is no. Well, it's not true. It's called rented land. So what I want to make sure is, I want to make sure that when we talk succession, and this is important for non-farm children as well to understand, succession is a joint effort to create a career path for the person who wishes to be a farmer.
Ooh.
It does not necessarily mean all the land wealth is going to go to the business. So that's what succession to me, and we'll talk about that a fair bit, is clarity of a career choice, right? And like Annessa will talk about a clear path to ownership of that business. And then estate planning is not just wills, it's transferring wealth or living off of wealth. And that's going to be a new concept I want to really push tonight, or today, is about how we live off wealth rather than transfer wealth, and why that's so powerful in intergenerational farms. And then the last thing, transition, is putting both circles together eventually into and we talk about process, not events. So that's kind of what I like to do. So succession is going to be the business, and then wealth usually includes the land or quota. We'll talk about supply chain as well.
Okay, excellent. So I want to start with a bit of a heated subject, but I feel it's important, and that's why I'm really starting to open the can of worms on the show, because often we can talk about all the strategies, but I think we need to get a lot of the human stuff out of the way earlier, right? We all have our expectations. Whether or not we speak them out loud is a different story, but I know you guys are big on acknowledging, addressing the unspoken expectations. So do you guys want to speak to that?
Sure. I'll let Annessa go first, I think, on this one.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely, I think the expectations came to light again for Dad when, I did come home and moved back to the family farm and all of those. And a saying that I came up early with in my career, I guess it's a little harsh, but unspoken expectations are the silent killers of family farms. And we just see this over and over again. A lot of the times, I think it's certainly not done intentionally to not bring up that expectation, but it's just not brought up for various reasons. We're gonna wait a bit to broach this subject, or we just didn't know that we hadn't explained it in the way that I interpret it. That goes back and forth all the time. Dad will say, well, I didn't mean it like that. And I'm like, well, it came across like that, right? So just laying those out. So some ways that, we'll talk about today to kind of try to address those in a family ran business, of course, is, bringing in a little bit of business governance to our operations, and also some operational efficiencies that we do in our work that not only helped our father-daughter relationship, but also helps the families we work with. So I'll let you speak a little bit more, Dad, to kind of diving in on what were some of your expectations as a parent.
Well, it's quite simple. Just do what I tell you to do, and don't ask too many questions. I mean, that works well, doesn't it? That's how my generation were entered into a business. Of course, I can go back 40 some years when I was entering our business with my father. Those days was my way or the highway, and of course that is not necessarily cricket in our culture, and our moving forward in each generation changes. But I think the most important part on expectations boils down to the frustration of not communicating that. And then Annessa has her axiom that she uses, and I'll have another one as well. Perception is reality, facts are negotiable. because we can talk all day about what we want to have happen, but the perception is really what it's called. So when people talk about communication, it's really unspoken expectations and lack of clarity. That's what it is. Yeah. And so when we sit down and talk about it, I think we have to be, since we are an agricultural business, one of the simple ways when I talk to the old college kids is rules of the farm come first. Like, you are entering an agricultural business. An agriculture business is totally based on busting your ass in a very short time period. So there cannot be alternate time periods where there's going to be conflict. Like, you don't care if you come from a background where it's 9 to 5, it ain't going to work in an agricultural based business. And so that's primarily, I would say, built around, if you grew up on a farm, you know those expectations, but your significant other or partner may not have those expectations. So it's not just talking to the business partner that's coming home with your child, it's also the person they're bringing with them or are involved with. So that's probably the first one, is rules of the farm come first.
But the counterpart to that from the junior generation that, you know, we work on, and the culture that we are now, is we are looking for more of that work-life balance. Every family that I sit down with, that's one of the first ones that comes up. So saying, you know, okay, Dad, obviously during harvest and seeding, I'm not going to be going camping, but you're knowing right now that these weekends of the year we are gone, and you're not pulling me in for a parts run or something like that that doesn't need to be tracked at that time. So it's hard to facilitate these conversations, and they sound so simple. Like, why are they talking about creating a calendar on a podcast and things like this? But it certainly is those just common sense things that we don't talk about because they're deemed common sense, but we're not talking about them. Right?
Exactly.
I was just going to say, I've gone through the same thing with Anthony, where I didn't grow up on a farm. My grandparents farmed, and I went out to the farm. It's a little bit different than actually living on the farm. Now, if you farm, we farm with our in-laws, but completely separate. We own all our own farming assets, et cetera, et cetera. But we do work together. And then when you have a generation that goes, holidays? Like, what do you mean? Why are you leaving? And I'm going, yeah, we want to go on holidays. And then Anthony's like, yeah, I want to go on holidays, but right? That's hard
stuff.
Stuck
In the middle.
Yeah.
So for an example, since this is a conversation, a podcast, one of my clients we worked on was a grain operation, quite large, and we're in pedigreed seed. And so to have this discussion of when the holidays are going to occur, we finally made a corporate decision that the holidays they could take anytime they wanted in January.
Okay.
That was the solution. And in order to honor that, the holiday bill was 50% paid by the company and 50% paid by the son and the daughter-in-law. Nice. So, and then we also set what the company was willing to pay. Like
Merle, you froze up.
His internet's been really, really good for all of this.
Company packaging. And so,
hey, Dad.
Later on. Okay.
Okay, hold on one sec. Are you back with us, Merle?
I guess so. Yep.
Okay, you froze up there for a little bit. When this happens, we got to figure out the right spot to go back to so we could...
just start with your client example, Dad.
Yeah, just start with the client example there.
So on these holidays, one of the examples that I like to bring up is in a quite successful pedigreed seed business. We sat down and looked at this and said, okay, you can't go to the lake, sometimes in spring, which is June, or what's more happens is when the kids got off school, right? July and August. So of course, these people also had a haying enterprise. So there was never a damn right time. And that's where we get into sector differential later on. When is the right time? It's like talking to a dairy farmer. When's the right time, right?
Oh,
Every day is bloody work. So I'm just trying to say we have to look at also sectoral base and what enterprises you're in. And so what I'm trying to get at there is, so finally to make a piece, we decided to the family agreed to have their main holiday in July.
Okay.
And was great. And in January, sorry, not July, in January, but because it was not necessarily exactly what they wanted, the company, as part of the understanding of expectations, the company agreed, the jointly owned company paid half the holiday costs to a maximum of $2,500. So that way the company recognized they didn't have the flexibility in the summer, but they would like to have, like taking their holiday trailer out, but the company would then compensate the holiday by paying 50% roughly of the cost up to $2,500. So that little idea just seemed to, both people were recognized and appreciated of what the controversy was.
Yes.
And Tracy, this is a conversation. The young man was very happy they finally came to this, because guess what the compromise was on the holiday trailer? He parked it and he came at nights, but he wasn't there during the day.
Nice.
It just that both people understood what they were doing. So that's just an example of one of the stories that I can share.
I love it. And that's important, right? The expectations. I'm just going to really quickly say, not only in farm families and farm businesses, in relationships in general. Don't every one of us come from the way we grew up into a relationship with probably somebody super different, and we're expecting our life to go how we grew up. Then you bring this individual in and it's like, what? And
opposites attract.
Yeah. So I get it. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So then the next one, so kind of off the HR one, what I'm noticing more of course, is from the parent side, I guess, and this is where like people like Dick Whitman, who does a lot of work in this area, when we get into the fiscal side of it, I'm going to use a quote from John F. Kennedy. He's a very famous president, and in his speech, he said, "Don't ask what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country." So when I speak to young people, I'm saying to them, first question when we get to about where we're going to go and how we're going to work together is, what are you bringing back? If you just pine for what I have, I'm not interested. I'd rather have a hired man that I can yell at than have to have Nessa work with me. I've told her that a couple of times. It's much easier to hire somebody else. So what I'm trying to get at is that, so when I say that quote, then of course the parents have to be open for the suggestions. So, but I like that quote, and I think that could resonate with your audience, is what are you bringing back to the business, and what do you expect out of the business? And one of the biggest ones, Tracy, I've seen lately in certain files is housing. It's pretty frustrating to me if Annessa would have come back to the farm and said, "Hey, I don't want to live in Grandma's house," which she was in for a while. "I want a brand new house." And I've had this with clients saying, slow down. Who's paying for it? Well, the farm is. Well, hold it. What is the cost? What is the, so when we talk about housing, which is always huge, right? Because you don't want your son and daughter living in the basement forever. So what I'm trying to get at, I think one of the things is on capital budgeting. Do you, as a young couple coming back to the farm, what is your highest priority? Have a brand new house for $500,000, or what is the objective? We can't stack on too many capital purchases. Housing, buy the neighbor's quarter, buy a brand new tractor. What's the priorities? Yes. So housing to me is a big one. And in flip side of that, if you do make a decision to build a house on farmland, one of my commandments of succession, you will own the land your house is on. I will never allow young people not to own the property where their marriage is located on. So there's my...
It can be like a subdivision or something like that, what's appropriate at the time. And then I flip it around and say, "Okay, Dad, that's a lot of like coming down on me. I have questions for you, because if I'm going to enter this business and take on the debt and the risk and all of that comes with it to support my family, what's your financial security? How much of the retirement income is expected to come from the business? Is it 50%, 100%? I don't need to know the exact figure, but I also do need to know before, I go out and put my name on that next quarter or that debt. Housing again, are you going to stay in the house in the home quarter because, my brothers and sisters' childhood bedrooms are there and they feel connected to the house and can't tell us what to do with the house, even though they left at 18. We see that all the time in our conversations. And then, what is your expectations for me to be a capable successor? Because these are the ones in my client consult meetings that are heartbreaking when parents will bring up issues or concerns they had with the successor 20 years ago, but they never addressed it, and it's coming into how they're writing the will, which we'll talk about later, and things now. So getting those laid out so that I know I have a clear path to ownership. And I think, something we really, really promote is saying, okay, yeah, you've got to talk about this, but are we recording these conversations? So something we really stress is family memorandums of understanding. Obviously, they're not legal documents. They won't stand up in court, anything like that, but it's just a time and space to record what our family conversation and agreement was, because it's hard to remember what was said 10, 15, 20 years ago, right?
Yes.
And the critical why we made the decisions we did. And, again, that's kind of creeping into estate planning there, Tracy, but those are really powerful if the off-farm children challenge at any point, to say, hey, no, mom and dad signed this 20 years ago. We had the agreement, and really lines up nicely, as Dad said at the beginning. Transition planning is a process, not an event. And so if we set these expectations to timelines, my anxiety or pushiness as the junior generation drastically goes down, because I know, just like if I worked on any off-farm job, I go from here, then I get a bonus, and I go to here, and this is my expectation. And holy Hannah, now I'm becoming an owner of the company. What are those expectations laid out? So Dad can't be mad at me and say, oh no, I don't agree with that. We're not going to do that deal anymore. Like, I met your check boxes.
I love it. I heard, actually, Elaine Phrase say the words, clarity is kindness. And that stuck with me, because how often in farm families, we're not clear with each other, right? And we don't know the expectations. And it's actually mean, right? If we're not being clear about it. So I love that.
It goes back to that perception, right? Like, what I said is right from how I perceive it.
Right.
So just to interject here, and this is why I think this is important, not just talk about the issue, but actually come up with a solution, I call them lines in the sand, Tracy and Annessa, where that I want absolute clarity. Because when people say, Dad, what are you going to need to retire on? How in the hell do I know, right? Mm-hmm. Am I going to get sick? Am I going to, so these ideas of doing financial analysis 20 years before the event happens, I mean, God, you can already figure out what the crop's going to be next year. But one thing I do put in very, very strongly is and this is probably the most important point of my discussion about succession, is the business can only afford to do so much, right? So what I always say to people is, once Dad and the child, farm son, farm daughter, children, whatever, once that has been decided that they have a career path to own a business with the older generation, the point that has to be drawn in the sand is, I'm never buying a tractor twice, which means in lingo, no income created from the business shall go to non-farm children, and non-farm children shall not own part of the business. That is to me is the ultimate line in the sand. And the way to explain this to your audience is, if I have an off-farm sister who has a pension, if she wants part of my business wealth that I'm creating with my career, then as a farming brother, I want part of her teacher's pension. So I just want to make sure people understand this. It's not saying that my off-farm siblings won't acquire some of my parents' wealth, but they're not acquiring my parents' and my jointly income created in the business. So that is why we talk about clarity. We can't get into the actual details of each week, the month, their date, but we got to come back and say, once I've joined the business, we'll have a next idea about this. Once I have joined your business and have proven myself to be a partner, not just a child, then you guarantee me as a parent that none of that income will go to my siblings, unless it's part of an estate plan. So that's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay.
So there's my preaching from the mount sermon.
Preach, Merle, preach. That's what I have you here for.
Okay. But
remembering that we had land on that other side of the
land is another whole different story. I'm not tying that up yet. But you see, if we focus on the business side, it's like, do you want to open up a business? Yes. So what are the rules of that business? So we got to have parents work on one side of the equation quite a bit of the time.
I love it. And exactly like you said, Annessa, I have a corporate background. I own a media company and we farm. And I couldn't imagine showing up on the farm and having no clarity, no conversations, like how resentful I would be, to be honest, if I'm high on I am high on the control spectrum of life, and I enjoy knowing where my life is going. I couldn't imagine the expectations and the resentment that would form if both generations wouldn't have those conversations, right? It's like showing up for a job. You know how much you make, you know you have a position, you know the future potential within the company, give or take. There's a path there, right? Even if you're a human that doesn't love certainty at all points, you have a clear path. So I really like that point, guys.
Yeah, and it's an interesting culture shift that, it's kind of the norm, or certainly from some families now, the expectation that you're very much encouraged to go work for someone else or go to post-secondary. And so that's where we're coming back and really having this head bang now of, potentially the parents didn't follow that path, or they did. And so you're going from that place of structure, Tracy, and expectations, and now coming back and being blocked in. So it's adding a whole other element that wasn't necessarily always there before.
Good point, Annessa. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, you younger generation, you just don't trust us. Someday this will all be yours, so quit giving me this hassle, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, and look how Lion King turned out. It was not.
Oh dear, I'm going to die laughing. Those were the perfect lines right there. We slipped up the show. We're done. Let's call it quits now. Oh, shoot. That was good. Okay. Unspoken expectations. Do we have more we want to cover on that? That's some good stuff.
I think it kind of will certainly ebb and flow in all our conversations, and Dad and I will certainly try to help structure the conversation with some points of interest. So probably come in and out the more we talk.
Okay, so should we move on? And again, you're right, we kind of flow here and there. Should we move on to the roles, responsibilities, go into that a little bit more?
Perfect.
Sure. So once we've decided that, okay, you want to work with the old man, then we sat down.
Mom.
Oh yeah, and mom. Yeah, well, take that back. We both work for mom. So
Exactly.
when in most farm families. So to make a long story short, based on I went to university, and of course have all these charts and things. But what I'm trying to say is, everyone talks about writing job descriptions, which of course nobody ever did in my generation. You just worked all the time. And work in my generation was outside work. If you weren't visibly outside, you weren't working. And I think that's something that now has changed a lot with all the technology that young farmers are doing, and stuff they do behind the computers, right? So that's just a culture shift as well that we have to understand when we have different cultures of different ages.
Make sure it's recognized, though, from the senior generation.
Right, because if I was in the house doing pedigrees all night and doing registrations, Dad felt why wasn't I outside till 9 o'clock with him, right? So I just that a lot of stuff. But so just I don't spend a lot of time on this too much, because I don't want to only have an hour. But if you're going to do job descriptions, which are very, very good, if you do that work, if you're not going to do that work, at least I want 4 words that you guys can talk about is between generations, and that's an employee, a key employee, a manager, and then a lead. So what I mean by that, by using those words, if you're 20, when Nessa joined GRS as an employee, I made it quite clear to her that she was an employee. So employees have to take direction. When I hire a hired man or a hired lady, they have to I'm hoping they'll take direction, and hopefully they give me back input, but I'm kind of the boss, right? Like I'm kind of that level. And then a key employee, what I mean by that is that then you're no longer just an employee, you're a key employee to the company or the business, so your responsibility has to increase, right? Or maybe you're responsible for an area. And then a manager is really an area of responsibility. And the reason why I'm doing this, it goes back to compensation, correct?
Okay.
And so then the last one is I come up with a word called a lead. And that the lead area is not really that important between, we only have one child and a parent farming either together or beside each other. The big thing about leads is where you have, I call the Bermuda Triangle from hell, which is you got dad up top, son 1, son 2, and mom's in the middle. And that's where the lead and responsibility becomes more important, where there's multiple owners that are not just parents, but rather siblings. So the lead area is really important in sibling relationships, but I would say in father-son or father-daughter relationships like Annessa and ours, was to have those kind of neat definitions and responsibilities without going into details of what her tasks were, but rather the path to move up the line. And so and the
expectations to graduate.
Right. And so in my mind, once again, I like lines in the sand, is once I am up to a manager, then I want to be an owner.
Okay.
Like if you have a single company like a dairy, once I'm managing something in the dairy and I hit that responsibility. So I need two things from Dad on that. I need the time, how long it's going to take me to be a manager of a certain area. And when I do become a manager, then you have to start having these hard conversations of me becoming an owner of the company. Without agriculture is not like, it's kind of a weird situation. Unless you become an owner, you're not really in, right? I mean, as being part of an owner-managed business. Same as you, Tracy. If you're working for somebody else, it's not yours. I don't care if it's a parent or not. So that little idea of just concepts real quickly is employee, key employee, manager, and then a lead is responsible to the business rather than to each other. So
and Dad, just a comment on job descriptions. Like we certainly know, I think if Dad was to write me a job description, he'd be like, here's the shovel, you know what to do with it. But what we're trying to bring some again of that formal procedures back, because going back to those expectations, we had a job description exactly like you said, Tracy, when we work off farm, right? And so, it can be super messy. I don't care if it's written down on a napkin to start this culture, but just jotting down what some of those tasks, who do I answer for? And then, what kind of takes it from that next level is sometimes to change this culture, we have to have a little bit of fear base, right? That's why a lot of this succession estate planning is what happens if mom and dad pass away prematurely, right? Do we have our ducks in a row? Well, the element of fear-based a little bit too is, do we have any of these operating procedures for safety incidents? So unfortunately, Dad and I have each year, our numbers have been growing of working with families where tragedy has struck at a very young age for the farming child to be killed or hurt significantly. And so, something as simple as, do we have somewhere that someone knows where the power button is, right? To like close power. Do we have some of these safety things documented, especially now as we get into legalities of having more hired help and things like that. So there's the element of it being annoying and frustrating, but as we do grow and start to bring in more of these, equipment, things like that, we have to take a step back and assess it from that lens too.
You silence the doubters. You get the best tools. You work with the right people. You look to the future and bust through.
I like it. It is corporate. And, sometimes I wonder in our audience if they're going, come on, Tracy, we're not a corporation. Why are you trying to be so structured and stuffy? I think, the joy of being a farmer and just doing your thing is your
don't have to deal
doing
with
your
that.
thing. You don't have to be corporate. So I get that. I'm kind of right in the middle. But the nice thing is procedures, positions, it's kind of like a to-do list, right? It's a structure for your life. It's structure for processes. And I'm not even a detail-oriented person, but it's just nice. And Merle, I like that idea where you say the 4 different words. That's a nice path, because sometimes, I remember being young. Okay, I'm coming in and I'm owning the world. But wait a minute. Dad, mom, grandpa, grandma, they're the boss. And we need to respect that. And they have their career path. So if we can bring the next generation in with words, names, positions, that's a nice way to say, slow down. We take this step by step and we both walk through this together, right? Not just, exactly. I'm home, let's sign the papers.
Yeah. See, that's what I'm saying, Tracy, is that if we can use some just main keywords, right? And then we can talk about, okay, so like if we had more time, like one of the things in our longer sessions, and Annessa and I talked about is, this is important. When I was telling her what to do, she sometimes came back and said, why? And I'm going, geez, just do what I want, right? And so that created a fair, because she's strong-willed, so it created a fair bit of frustration for me. And because, so one thing.
Not me at all.
Well, you just wouldn't listen, that's all. But so what I was trying to get at the end was that we came to a compromise. I want to share that compromise with the audience. Because I said, okay, it's kind of like if I'm in the middle of doing reports or doing something I have to get done or get a presentation ready, so I'll put it in agriculture. I'm right in the middle of seeding. If you say to me, why are we not doing this? I would like the parents to understand three things. One, if they never asked a question, then we don't want them around anyways, because we want them to ask questions, but not in the time of the rules of the farm. So what I mean by that is, if I tell you to do something in the heat of whatever the tasks are, and you ask why, you honor me enough not to keep bugging me and do what I tell you. But then in return, I have to honor Nessa's inquisitiveness and ideas to change something, and I will honor that in a conversation later. So instead of saying, I don't have time to discuss it now, I'm going to say, I don't have time, but I'm not dismissing the question. I'm just postponing the time to discuss the question. So between us, I don't know, you can answer this, Nessa, but between us, that created a lot more peace, I guess I would say, and respect for each other, because then, in her mind, why didn't you answer it right now when it's fresh in her mind? I'm saying no. And so maybe you can speak to that. I think it was pretty important in our development of getting along.
Yeah, and I think, that was certainly, like very thankful that Dad came to that place first, and then we grew from there. And, Maggie Van Kemp, I love her, pace and grace, right? Like we have to have that for everyone in the family. So, we did that for a little bit, but then I said, to Dad, these time sensitive things, they're not always time sensitive. Like, we're seeding approximately this timeline, or for us, it was moving cattle. We know we're moving cattle on Saturday, and so we don't want the gloves to come off, but you can talk about it with me proactively too on Monday, because otherwise it's constantly, we're going to do it my way and then I'm going to hear you out. But, and then sometimes, holy Hannah, we did change our plan when we talked it out, and, miraculously I did have some good ideas and stuff like that. And so the other part to that evolved as well was he would say he'd get back to me, but there was it was an unspoken expectation of when. So, I'm like, is it tomorrow? Is it 2 weeks from now? So that also became a commitment that, we'd sit down and have a conversation after a week. Like that was kind of our.
Nice.
So interesting what grows of it, but.
Well, and I think too, funny enough, I think there's a personality aspect to that as well. Right away, I'm going to be recording an episode on personality types. And I know personally from working with my husband and getting to know him more and more, I can talk about anything at the drop of a dime. Hard subject, anything, right? He's more of an introvert, needs to think it through versus having a conversation on the spot.
Aren't those people frustrating?
Which one? The ones that got to process it in their head? Yes.
No, yes, to me, like I'm like you, Tracy. Those people, can't they just catch up? Come on.
Yes. So there's that too. And I think that's important, because I find sometimes if you come at somebody, they have their reasons, but maybe they can't articulate them. I'm not saying that's you, Merle. I'm just thinking some different personalities that work together where.
That's our mom. My mom, we have to finally came to respect that. And same thing, she'll come to the table 3 days later and have excellent points that Dad and I on our quick starts missed, right?
Yeah. So I think that's a worthy point to put in there, because I think that stumps up a lot of relationships, whether spouses or parents and kids working together, because dad or mom's like, give me a moment. I know why I do this, but I just can't articulate it. Back off, right? I've come to learn that's important as well.
So the buzzword that Nessa's brought to me is just a moment, please.
Just a moment, please.
Yeah. When you're like on telemarketing and you're like waiting and waiting. So that's definitely, and I know we'll move on here, but kind of something that really has helped Dad come to that appreciation, because it was when we were pretty heated and I'm like, well, if I didn't ask questions, I don't care, was what's your saying now, Dad? You don't take questions as?
Yeah, well, this is what came from one of my clients, is that he's having trouble with his dad, and he says, why do you take every question as a challenge? So questions are not necessarily challenges, and that helped. Like instead of when Nessa asked a question, my first reaction is, well, why are you asking? And secondly, you're challenging my authority or my experience.
Totally.
So by having me slow down and understand that, I said to myself, when she asks questions, she's caring about the business, wants to understand the business. So questions are not necessary challenges. So I think every man over 55 should have that on his bathroom wall. His questions are not challenges. Look at it every time.
Oh, I love it. That is a very good point too. It's hard, right? Especially Merle, if you've built the business, the farm, whatever it is, the spotlight's immediately on you if people ask questions. I could feel that too. If somebody came into my business and say, why do you do it like this? Do that? Right? It'd be like, whoa.
And I think, I know we're moving on, but just the underseed there was, Dad came home and acted like this was like an epiphany and like the smartest thing this young man could have ever said to him. And I was like, oh my God, like I've been trying to get that across to you for how many years, right? So I think it does show that, we need to use third parties to help facilitate. It's not mediation. It's not that we can't get along or anything. It's just some ways to word things or listen differently. So third parties are an excellent assistance.
I agree. Okay, fantastic. So I really love that. A lot of this stuff, when they call this soft skills, I always get kind of mad because to me, the soft skills are the hard skills. And it's not that I'm not gifted in those areas, but I truly do think humans versus the technical details of farming and our job, the peopling, as I call it, the peopling can be the hard part. So I like this conversation, guys. This is great. Okay, we're going to move from the hard soft skills into a little bit of a different point here. Do you guys want to go into the equity game versus income game and explain what you mean by that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So what I want, I'll just start it and Annessa will get into where she wants to bring her points in. What I want to make sure of is that, especially this is kind of ties into a young relationship or coming back to the farm, is that it's kind of interesting. Our whole industry is based on large asset values. Mm. And so one time I said farming is an equity game, not an income game. And what I mean by that is that there's always somewhere to spend the income. And when you spend the income, what's it on? In an agriculture base where land is hugely expensive and machinery is even worse, it seems like, we're spending all our income on assets, not living. Where if I'm a lawyer, my business is a service business, the capital that I have to have is diddly squat. I own a briefcase and a computer, correct? Where if I want to run a business, then of course with the large capital. So one of the things I want to reiterate a lot is the farm off-farm scenario. Because like my sister left home when she was 18 and became a teacher, correct? And my other sister married a farmer. But my brother didn't stay to the farm. So when we discuss, if they show up to the farm and see a $350,000 used tractor, they're going, holy shit, are these guys ever wealthy? So I'll let Nessa talk about this more. I just wanted to set the stage a little bit of what, from the second generation, what I think that we need to do a better job of communicating to siblings that are off farm.
Okay.
Yeah, and this conversation, really derived from again, those unspoken expectations to the junior generation of why don't you just get this? That we're, I sum it up, I think it's a little bit easier. We've all heard asset rich, cash poor, right? In our case. And I turned around, pretty quickly and said, well, have we been justifying that culture to our children? Because I know in my school that I went to, there was a lot of grains and dairies in the area, and the children were driving the parents' Denali's to, school and showing up. So I'm like, are we living this culture? We've had a pretty good run in grain, specifically in agriculture, right? So how does that affect that now, if we do become a little tighter, seeing these crazy input costs that we're going into here, well, why don't you remember the 80s and the 90s, right? Like, well, obviously don't remember them, right? So have we built that up? And then I think it really, as Dad alluded to, just slowing down and saying, do we understand how much capital it takes to make $1 of grocery money? So Dad, you did an excellent article because we talk about this a lot for Country Guide, and you used all these big words, and I cut to the chase and I'm like, So in your example, Dad, $125 of capital was required for the farm family to make $1 of grocery money. Like, we have to let that sink in, right? And the gap is, I don't think we've done a good enough job teaching the actual farming generation that reality. But then that next level is, how can we be so frustrated with our off-farm children when we haven't educated them on that? They're just seeing the $1 million land quarters, or, like Dad alluded to, the great big combines. You don't know what you don't know, and we can't be mad at them for not understanding that if we don't relay that information.
I sometimes look at it, and siblings don't say anything, but if they want to look at what we have and go, ooh, isn't that nice? I'll go, yeah, walk on down to the bank, get a stack of papers, sign your life away, have enough debt that almost makes you cry under the table. I'm okay with our debt, but if you want to do all that, go ahead, and you can have what we have.
Yeah, and that's why. And that is why I go back to my line in the sand, is that I'm not going to buy a tractor twice. Like, I'll work with it and work with you. And that word comes across just like that thing. When you talk to a farmer audience and say, look, the business is a business, explain the amount of capital required to make $1 of net income and then $1 of
grocery money.
So just for an example for your audience, like I do a lot of financial stuff in my mind too, is, you know what's really interesting? I want everybody to do this when listening to the podcast. The last 3 or 5 years, most people's machinery investment is 1.2 times gross revenue.
2 times gross revenue. Okay.
Up to with a maximum of 35% debt, because that shows you. So if you're grossing $1 million, most farmers that are grossing $1 million have roughly $1,250,000 to $1.5 million of equipment. So those kind of snappy things will give a person a very quick understanding. So then if you say this, going back to make this conversation real for off-farm kids, say, I've got to have $1 million equipment to make $1 million of gross income. Net income is 40% of gross. Living costs are usually 40% of net. That's where I'm coming back to, it takes 125 or 150 bucks of capital to make $1 of disposable income. So I'm trying to get across. Also a challenge. People say to me, when am I overcapitalized on machinery? I just say, tell me your gross revenue for the last 3 years, and I'll tell you if you're overcapitalized or not. That quick, because it's kind of a neat track. It tracks pretty equal to about 1 to 1.4 times gross revenue people have in equipment investment.
Interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
And then obviously we've kind of alluded to it already, but I think in trying to make today more of a little bit of a conversation and stuff is really critical. Okay, does, again, the spouses understand that? So even if the farm child does or doesn't understand, are we making sure that the spouse understands that conversation as well? And I'm a little different than Dad, because I think he's a little old school, but when I ask what does the spouse's background or occupation, he kind of says, oh, they're good if they've come from a farm. And I really challenge that, because were they properly taught the same rules? And their farm books could be completely different than the farm books they're analyzing here, and how they choose to expand or stay. So we don't talk about it. It's kind of the jokes, you married a farmer. But, just slowing down and really going through these expectations that always shock me. These, large farms or small farms. Oh yeah, they've been dating 8 years. And I'm like, does she have any idea, or does he have any idea? And it'll work out. I'm like, we should talk about these things. So
yes, good for you guys having those hard conversations. That's awesome. Better you than me.
But that's exactly it. I wouldn't want Dad coming to my relationship and being aggressive on those questions, right? Again, going back to just that safety of, if you can use a third party, but I always say blame Google, right? There's so much information on Google that it's a little bit overwhelming for sure, but you can find some excellent resources and say, hey, there's kind of some questions on this transition site. I'm not bringing it up, Mom and Dad. Google is.
Or blame it on Tracy. Impact Farming Show.
Excellent. So in this whole idea of farming equity, I want Annessa to describe something that we both came up together, and it's and your husband's going to do this for you. Okay, Tracy? So Annessa, explain what she's going to ask her husband to do when it comes to equities and a date.
Oh yeah, the equity date. Yeah, perfect. So this definitely came from, again, those unspoken expectations, Tracy, tying it back to, are we sharing properly the transition plan or goals with the spouse, whether they're actively involved in the operation or not. I was constantly having couples that, there was quite a bit of tension, and, the big ones, labor, always, right? Time, things like this, commitment, fiscal reality. And I would always turn to the farming husband or wife and say, have you shared with your spouse or significant other that you got more share ownership this year, or that, we had purchased a new combine and that was part of it? And they always went, well, no. And so, it's really just slowing things down. And that's where Dad and I kind of came together, and we call it the equity date. And if you have a corporate card, expense it. But, once or twice a year, go out on your equity date that the farm supplies, and have that conversation with your spouse.
So what I'm saying, Tracy, is that your hubby's going to take you to a date, and he's going to say,
in COVID, so he's going to make you supper.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, and you can bring in a pizza in.
McDonald's drive-through.
So to make a long story short, what this equity date's all about, it hit on one of my clients years ago, was the young lady was quite frustrated because, of course, her young husband was always busy working his ass off, and they're developing different enterprises, and there's not enough time to take off for the kids. The same old thing that every family farm goes through. And so I said to this young man, I said, okay, all she sees is you working, and of course not a lot of disposable income in their situation for themselves personally. If they had more money, they had no time anyway. So I said to this young man, I said, did you ever I said, why are you working so hard? He said, well, to increase equity. I said, great. So why don't you show your wife, take her on an equity date to show you how much of your shares have increased in value, or your business, how much debt you paid off, and show her and say, yeah, I had no time off, I busted my ass, but guess what? Our equity went up by $340,000 in the last 3 years.
Nice.
So that's when we cover this idea of an equity date. And I loved my spoken energy with Annessa, and the young man in the front row said, I love it. I think it's a great idea. And I am so pumped about this. I'm going to have it the same day I have my anniversary date. So therefore,
I advised him that wouldn't go well.
He said, no, that's not such a great idea, kid. He said, well, yeah, but he says, then I can do two things at one time, So
farmer, kill two birds with one stone, right?
That's right.
Oh, I think
I've heard that. Even to make it humorous, I just cannot believe how many young farmers do not tell their significant others why we're working so hard and not show it. I mean, that's the pride. You paid off a quarter. You bought a combine. You paid it down. You bought another asset. That's what farming is all about, is creating equity. So share it.
I don't really want to say much about that. I just find that I'm kind of speechless when it comes to that. We give ourselves titles on the farm and in the business. I'm VP of finances, so I know what's going on.
Great, you do then, dear. Okay.
Yeah. Good.
No, perfect.
Well, and I think that's so important, right? Clarity in every single part of relationships, the farm business. When I was in corporate, they're big on culture and core values and communications. Their big thing, which is not always easy, is over-communicate. And when you think everybody understands, go at it another few times to make sure it's clear. Now, I think in farm businesses, that gets challenging because we have family dynamics, but it's so important. So important, right?
Yeah, it's certainly tricky. I know, Dad and I struggle with that too, Tracy. Like you did a great job of addressing it. We're kind of in the middle that, yeah, these are all the things you should be doing, but are Mom, Dad, and I doing it at our farm? No, not to the standard that, we should be. So I think, just trying to come up with some things to help structure those unspoken expectations or the conversation, kind of what we talked about today. What % of the senior generation's retirement income is coming from the farm, right? Like, do we have any idea of what that percentage is going to look like? If land is coming up for sale and we're, trying to expand, who's footing that bill, right? Like having some of these structured, where are we going to live? Dad talked about residences and ownership there. So just kind of taking those big buckets and coming up with those questions certainly helps.
Okay, lovely. Well, that was a lot of good stuff. Thank you for summing it up. we are going to work to wrap up part 1 of our 2-part series. Do you guys want to leave the audience with any final words of wisdom? And then what I'll do after that is ask you to share your contact information in case people want to get in touch with you. So final words of wisdom, if you have any, for our audience on succession planning and what we cover.
Yeah, there's one part we didn't get to, which I think is really important, and it's an observation. I would say 70% of my client base who have commercial-sized farms, the second generation will not work under their parents. They'll work beside their parents. And what that means, we'll do this in another podcast maybe someday, is talking about what's normally happening is, same perhaps as you guys in your situation, you have a separate business center from the in-laws. So what I'm finding is we'll see I'll call them two profit centers. I don't care if they're partnerships, companies, but there's 2 tax returns being filed on the farm, right? There's 2 separate tax returns. When I started up, we had 2 separate returns, Dad and I, then eventually we got large enough that our advice was to form one company, right? Now, under that scenario, I was willing to do that. So I was willing to work under my father because I joined his company.
Okay.
Correct? What you'll find now is where the second generation wants to run their own business separate from the parents. I call this as a new terminology, 2 profit centers, 1 agronomic mind. We'll agree to put the crop in, we'll agree to work together, but we're not having 2 businesses together. So in another podcast, not today, I would like to, Annessa and I, to explore that with your audience of how that works and
most of our work
and how it works and doesn't work. But one of the biggest things is when you do this, when you work beside your parents, one of the biggest unspoken expectations will be this. I'll guarantee the older generation is subsidizing your business. Yeah, and if you don't think they're subsidizing, I think we are subsidizing. So if I'm wrapping this unspoken expectation, if you guys are operating 2 profit centers, 1 agronomic mind, the unspoken expectations need to be really, really understood on the fiscal side. Of course, I would help Nessa develop her own farm. That's what I want to do. That's the joy of me seeing the farm develop. But I want her to understand that maybe I'm giving her a $40,000 benefit. I don't want the money back, but I want the recognition for it. And then her response is, go ahead, Nessa. What normally? What
Thanks.
are my expectations?
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm trying to wrap it up because I could see Tracy being we've got to get this done.
We're good.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that benefit, but what's the expectations? Is it that I am putting funds into the next piece of equipment? What does that look like? Because, the times that Dad and I are called in is going back to that Denali truck. The junior generation was subsidized and didn't spend the money like the parents expected them to, but it was never relayed, right? So that's definitely.
Thank you for bringing that up, Merle. I wanted you to talk about that, but I wasn't quite sure if you wanted to bring that up in the next one. I think that's really powerful, and I don't share often a lot of our personal stuff on here, but that's what Anthony and I have done. And yes. I thought we were the only weirdos that did it that way. I really like it. And again, I've always said I'm big on being the captain of our own ship, Anthony and I. And what I've seen happen with the younger coming in and working for Dad and the expectations, and I call it a little bit of puppet master sometimes.
Of course it is under one profit center.
Yeah, so there's control issues. And to me, again, my biggest thing in life as a person is freedom and control of my life. So for us, not only for us to be in charge of our destination and grow and not have resentment, on the flip side, I didn't want to bulldoze into Anthony's parents' farm and take control of that and have resentment and I'm not ready and now we're splitting income. I think it is a glorious little situation if 2 family members can run their businesses side by side and work together. I think it's
I think that's the takeaway is I'm excited about this new model, right? Rather than working under my parents in one company, working beside. So that would be my takeaway on a lot of this. See, what I want to make sure people understand with my background of business structures and more formal training in business, if you open up options of how to set up a business, that you articulated it very well. If you have your 2 profit centers, you can decide how to spend your net income. Mm-hmm. If it's under one side, then the corporate structure is I will decide, right? And like all the accountants, regretfully, a lot of the accountants like a single profit center, because then they could say it's very simple. It's one tax return, it's one set of books, and it's so much better. But you realize that if you join your parents' company as a 24-year-old young person coming out of school, when are you going to actually understand what it costs to put a crop in? And when are you going to file your own return? Well, you're not going to understand gross margin or net income because you're not even doing your own damn books. So what I'm trying to get across is I think the culture change, and you said it very nicely. I love how you said it. I like to say we're not in competition. We just have 2 separate businesses. We have better communication that way. We're not trying to judge each other. As long as if I am your father-in-law and I'm supporting you with machinery, Nessa hit a nail on the head. What do I expect back, right? And as long as we understand, and one way I'll give you an indication because I'm financial based. One way to check on these false economies, I call it, like you're getting ahead quicker because it's a false economy because I'm supplying equipment for half price of custom work or whatever. At the end of the day, you can do that for a while as long as you make sure that at the end of the day, you have some guideposts that are actually understandable, not just communicated. And those are this. If I'm farming 2,500 acres and you're farming 500, maybe in 5 years, the target is we will have the same machine investment per acre farm. So that's a goal, because otherwise I'm subsidizing you forever. Or alternatively, one other one I like to use is we will have our operating loans to gross revenue roughly the same in 7 years. Okay. Like in other words, if my operating loan, if I'm grossing $1 million and Annessa's grossing 300 on her farm, right? If my operating loan is 40% of my revenue and hers is 0, that's a pretty good indication. That's a pretty good indication that I'm subsidizing her, and someday I'm going to get mad at it because I'm doing it too hard. Right? So I mean, we can get into some more math and stuff like that on another podcast, perhaps. What I'm just saying is, yes. I love the idea of 2 profit centers, 1 agronomic mind as the future for our intergenerational trends.
That's exactly what we did. That excites me, Merle. Okay, well, you guys are booked in for the fall series. We're going to be diving more into the financial end. So can I schedule you guys in for a topic on that? You have to say yes. We're on camera.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, then that's perfect. Thank you for bringing that up. I really wanted that in either part 1 or part 2, so good job. Now, if anyone in our audience wants to connect with you on a professional level for coaching, advisor, services, can you share your information?
I'll let Nessa go first.
Yeah, for sure. So absolutely. That's, the best part is hearing and talking to people afterwards and what resonated and what was gaps and things like that. So if you are looking for that one-on-one consultation with FCC, like I mentioned, we are spread out across the country. So if you call into your local FCC office, again, whether you're a customer or not, they will certainly put you in place with your area's person, and we have amazing people on our team. So perfect.
And for me, I'm pivoted in my career since I'm semi-retiring, Tracy. So Peggy and I have decided not to do individual counseling anymore, consulting. So I'm not going to take people's questions per se anymore. Okay. What I am doing, as I'm doing today, is trying to still get the knowledge and message out with educational opportunities. So if, tune into Tracy for more stuff down the road.
Right on. Now I have you hook, line, and sinker. Woo!
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. I really appreciate the wisdom you share, and I love the personality, the dad-daughter dynamic. That was great. Like, we're talking to a bunch of farmers who get this. It was so nice to see this dynamic. So thank you guys for joining us. We are going to be coming right back with part 2 of this 2-part episode. So thank you, guys. Thank you. And we will see you on the next episode. Bye, guys.
You silence the doubters. You get the best tools. You work with the right people. You look to the future and bust through.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.